Hi, um, wherever you're tuned in from. Welcome to the Kenyan Poet Podcast. My name is Njeri Wangari, and I have been out of the space for quite a while. This is season 2 of the Kenyan Poet Podcast. For those of you who have been fans, going as far back as 2010, 2011, and for those of you who have not been, I um, started the Kenyan Poet Podcast quite a while back in 2011. And so took a break, a 10-year break. But I'm excited to be back, and a lot has happened in that space, both from a personal perspective, as a poet, as a creative, and as a mother as well. So I'm excited to be back, and I'm excited to be talking to various creatives. The space has really grown, and today I will be introducing our guest today shortly. And in this season 2 of the Kenyan Poet Podcast, we'll be talking to various creatives who are doing amazing things and shaping the narrative of what it means to be African and reimagining the present as well as the future, even as we interrogate the past. So, welcome to the show. Now, I'd like to mention that this podcast has been made possible by the support of the Unique Kenya. That is, Unique Kenya is stands for European Union National Institutes for Culture, which basically aims to foster cultural exchanges and cooperation between Europe and Kenya. So, welcome to the show. Now, I would like to introduce my guest, or I would like him to introduce himself. I've known Chief Nyamweya for quite a number of years now. I think the the time that we got to interact a lot was during the Story Moja Festival. And he's an amazing illustrator, animator. He's published a book that he'll be talking to us about shortly. But just give us, I know we've sort of not spoken for quite some time. So what have you been up to? And some of the things that I haven't mentioned that you do.
Thank you very much, Jerry, for having me. It's a great honor to be on the Kenyan podcast or the Kenyan Poet podcast. In our creative ecosystem, we think of Kenyan Poet as an institution. You might not know this, but this is how we see you. Also, on the internet, you're much larger than life, and people always get surprised when they meet the person behind the handle. On my own. I'm the creative director of an animation studio called Freehand Studios, and we are located on Dagoretti Road in Karen. We make social impact animations for social impact. So, for example, we would not take, we would not work with clients like that are working in fossil fuel companies or other destructive industries, whether it's Shell or any other such person. We try as much as possible to live our values in our animation. And this came at the back of dabbling in a lot of client work over many years when we knew each other, and just learning, refining what we really wanted to be focusing on. We wanted to have a positive impact on our great grandchildren.
Great. And it's good you've mentioned, because you've given sort of a precursor of what we will be discussing today, largely, which will be on animation. And the reason why I felt it was important for us to have this discussion, because I know a lot of viewers, having those who have listened to the past podcast, it was mostly focusing on arts and culture. But the season 2, I thought I'd sort of give it a different twist and just look at the broader subject of culture and history, arts and expression. Now, you mentioned animation, and there is something that happened about 2 weeks ago. Netflix premiered series called Yasuke. I think we were just right now discussing whether it's Yasuke or Yasuke. Yes, so they just premiered a series. It's a 6 episode series on Yasuke, and it is, though it is not a biographical series. It is inspired by the real person, and Yasuke was actually a real person who existed in 1570 in Japan. Now, this Netflix series is the one that I'd like us to talk about, and also the fact that he was the first uh, Japanese samurai. All right. And, the implications of him as an African in Japan. This animation itself, it has been hailed as a new dawn for Black animation, and we'll explore those themes. So, maybe we can start with what was your reaction and in
Mhm.
realization that a real African samurai did
Mhm.
exist?
Honestly, I'm not surprised. If you're familiar with Yvonne Adiambo's book about the Dragonfly Sea, we know about the presence of Chinese on the East African coast, and even communities that are descended from those people who are in the East African coast. We know that Indonesians and other Polynesians were in Madagascar, and the current inhabitants of Madagascar are the descendants of the mixture that happened. So this is not new. I think what is new is representations. Even in my own experience in life, I've encountered people and things that are much more interesting than fiction. I've been in a NASA air park and meeting Nigerians, working at a very high level over there, and so this happens. um what is not there is the representations that show that Africans are multidimensional. And even as far as animation is concerned, there has been Afro Samurai before this one. And Black people are obsessed with anime. I know in Kenya here itself, the anime community is huge. From Anime Anonymous way back when I was in university, to all the cosplay shows that come about. This is only a response to that, and it's about time. And I don't think it should stop at this. This is just it's very little. But anime itself is a Japanese art form. It is a Japanese form of animation, and it behooves those of us who are interested in getting into animation in a professional level to also make our own contribution, because we can't wait for other cultures to represent us to the level that we feel we deserve.
Mhm. Great. And having looked at the reactions, because I
Hmm.
did an article recently looking at what the reactions have been to the Netflix animation, its animation series itself, as well as the implication in and the importance of that series, and the realization for most people that, oh, so this is actually based on the life of a real person. But the series itself has received lots of reactions, because actually a lot of people, it sort of became the gateway to people looking deeper and digging deeper into who is this character. And not because most people didn't know that there was actually an African samurai who existed. So I look at the series. There has been a lot of criticism about it, the making of it, but from a bigger perspective is what it has unearthed. And as an animator, I
Hmm.
don't know, I'm sure I hope you've had some time to look at the making of it. What were
Yes.
your reactions to it as an animator and an
I
illustrator?
think it's beautiful. It's very well made. The choice of having Flying Lotus doing the score was brilliant. He's a brilliant musician.
Mhm.
The cast is brilliant. This is I forget his name. The same guy from he's the same guy from the recent Judas and the Black Messiah. The lead.
Oh yes, I'm
I forget
forgetting
his
his name.
name.
Yes,
Yes, yes,
and
yes, yes.
yeah,
He's
he's
he's the
also
one who
in
plays
Get Out.
Yasuke. Exactly.
Yes, I
Yeah.
forget his name.
So I mean, it was well made. I think some of the reservations I've heard are around, to what extent is it the success that we are celebrating in terms of being um, an African story, or it's very much a Japanese story in
Mhm.
a Japanese context, and shedding a light on this character, but we don't learn very much about the world that he comes from, except for perhaps the presence of the witch doctor from Benin.
Mhm.
You don't really see the society that he emerges out for. It could also possibly be the fact that it's an African American cast. So
Oh
it's
yeah, yeah.
all,
So
all,
I
all,
had
all the
some
yeah,
reservations about that,
yeah.
because it is an African samurai who
Yeah.
existed.
So, and more
Yes.
likely, the real Yosuke would have come from a place that the Portuguese were visiting a lot, possibly Mozambique, possibly the Swahili coast, somewhere in East
Actually,
Africa where the.
there has been evidence that
Mhm,
contradicts the fact that he might have hailed from Mozambique, more likely Sudan. So there's a book that came out about 2 years ago, um, and I'm actually currently reading it, and places his origin to have been, because he was quite tall. He was 6 feet tall, so he's most likely to have hailed from Sudan, more than Mozambique. But there's still a lot of debate about his origins. Yes, so there's been lots of articles that have been written about what this particular um, animation series represents beyond the entertainment element of it. And it's been hailed as the new dawn for Black characters in animation. Talk to us about what has been the past in terms of having, and we've talked, and you've mentioned about representation. Let's talk about representation
mhm,
and the lack of,
mhm,
if that has been the case, of Black characters in animation.
mhm.
Yeah.
I'm very cautious about using superlatives like new dawn or new era. We had the same when Black Panther was released, that it's going to be transformative, and it has to a large extent. But really, especially as somebody working in the field, I can say the things that cause shifts are very nuts and bolts type of things, like how many studios are there available in your city if you're an African animator. How many mentors do you have available to you, including the resources that we have online? What sort of funding do you have access to? What sort of equipment? What sort of software licenses? Those nuts and bolts things are the ones which will be transformative, because it's not for lack of stories that our stories have not been escaping um, over here. And even until now, there are lots of people who've been working. Even in Kenya, animation has been going on for quite a long time, since Pete Mute and the rest of the guys with Tinga Tinga Tales were doing their thing. Um, it's very nuts and bolts distribution problems that we need to solve. Otherwise, we'll keep having the Hollywood productions, we'll keep having the Netflix sponsored productions, and we'll keep having our critiques of representation. But really, what will make the difference is once infrastructure is available for African creators. And we are currently in the process of trying to solve those things, usually in the face of real structural opposition, whether it's censors locally, whether it's just the normal business challenges that African creators face here. Those are the things that would be really transformative for us to solve the representation thing. Then there's also the question of how easy is it for a local creator versus somebody coming and they see ideas here. I myself have been involved in IP disputes. A lot of them, if you conduct yourself well, a lot of them get solved without coming into the public eye. But they are there. There are instances of it's much easier for somebody to come from Europe or the US and find a story and give it legs, and completely claim that. It's much harder for you to go in the opposite direction, to go and stake your claim to some German kids animation. It's not going to be possible. So all those are, sorry for dragging you into away from the story into nuts and bolts, but when you're living in it every day, those are the things that you pay attention to. We really need to build that infrastructure.
Mhm. Right. And sort of just coming back to and now looking at the life of the Yasuke, the real person,
Yes.
and here I'm looking at it in terms of the danger of a single story,
Yes.
because the single story of
Hmm.
Africans has been that of
Hmm.
enslavement,
Hmm.
subjugation,
Hmm.
and here comes along a story, because I've
Hmm.
even seen articles where they're still claiming that he was a slave
Hmm.
when in Japan,
Yeah.
and because for a lot of people it's very difficult
Hmm.
uh, to imagine an African who was free then,
Hmm.
and so my question is,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm. I hear your question.
and
Yeah.
sorry, I sort of got lost in the moment there. But what does this do in terms of challenging that
Hmm.
single narrative
Hmm.
about this is what we know about Africans, and this is
Hmm.
given? Yeah.
The period in which Yosuke is said to have been active, the late
Yes, it's in
1500s,
the late
that would
1500s.
that would fall at the start of the Edo period, and we know historically that the samurai were the highest caste in Japan at the time, the highest like military caste, and they worked with this daimyo. So that would have been a very high ranking. That does not sound like a servant.
Like a,
Or up, up
like a
until
slave,
up
yeah.
until up until the Meiji Restoration, the samurai were actually quite revered. And it's only during the Meiji Restoration that they tried to phase out the samurai and modernize Japan very quickly, which is also a very interesting story. Um, and yeah, I mean, we are currently inside the context. We are waking up from a nightmare of slavery and subjugation and colonialism and all those other isms, and our imagination can sometimes be constrained by the present, and we have difficulty seeing into the past. You need a historian's lens to understand that this period that you're familiar with of Africa being dominated by the West is a very modern period, that if you look at it on the scale in which Africans have been present in the world as the first human beings on this planet, um, the last few centuries is a very tiny microscopic sliver of our history. And actually it's more about restoring Africa's place than discovering something that we were not. If you think in terms of what are the specifications that you need to be an effective samurai, I mean, just look at Eliud Kipchoge, for example. Um, so yeah, I was very fascinated about it. Of course, I would have loved to see more about the context that he came from. What did he bring into this context? Why was I forget the daimyo's name? Nabanga,
N-
no, Nobunaga. Why,
Nobunaga,
why was
yes.
Nobunaga so
Yes.
taken by him? Historically, there are these funny anecdotes about Nobunaga wanting that was the first African who he'd met, so
It
he
actually
wanted him
happened.
to,
As I told you, I'm reading the book. It
you
actually
know,
happened. He
to
thought
to
that
to to scratch
Yasuke,
his
yes,
skin to
he
see if
thought
there
he
was
had
anything
some
underneath.
paint on. He
Yeah.
had some ink on, and then so he
Uh-huh.
actually ordered for Yasuke to be washed, and that happened.
Yeah.
Only to realize that it was actually his skin.
Yeah.
And I think at that point, that's a point where he became so fascinated that
Yeah.
he um, he was so taken by him.
Uh-huh.
And I'm yet to get to the part where that
Yeah.
encounter happened, but
Uh-huh.
I've read about it, and in the reviews of the series, and the
Uh-huh.
historical context.
Uh-huh.
But the daimyo was very
Mm-hmm.
fascinated by Yasuke for various reasons, and so
Mm-hmm.
he requested for, because Yasuke had brought a Jesuit to
Mm-hmm.
sort of help spread the gospel. But then how he
Yeah.
ended up staying in Japan is something that I'm curious about, and
Yes.
I'm reading to find
Yeah.
out.
I mean, the
Yeah.
curiosity goes both ways. I would say, as somebody who's been fascinated with anime myself from the earliest days of watching Rurouni Kenshin, about the Meiji Restoration, our fascination with Japan and the East in general, comes from wanting to see an alternative to the Western
Hollywood, yes,
narrative that
that's
is,
true.
is is the only narrative really that we are taught historically, and just based on our history, our education, and the fascination goes both ways. In my own travels in Southeast Asia, when I was traveling in Bagan in uh, in Myanmar, it was really interesting for me. I took so many selfies. People want to take selfies with me, and
I hope they didn't want to touch your hair.
well, I was too tall for them to access their hair. But it's interesting. It's very interesting, and I had that sense of being. Of course, I know I'm not the first Kenyan there. I know
Mm,
that Kinaded and Kimathi and the rest of them had gone there during the Second World War. But I really felt there were places that I went that I felt surely I must be the first Kenyan who's been here.
mm,
And it's nice to see other civilizations and to see other ways of being outside of just the corridor that we travel. And too often we travel back and forth in the corridors that are already established by
mm.
colonial trade routes.
Yeah. And still talking on representation,
Mhm.
I'd like us to sort of briefly discuss why it is important that we as Africans are able to see ourselves not just in the books that we read,
Mhm.
but also in the films and the animations that we watch.
Mhm.
Why is that important?
Mhm. Uh, because we model ourselves on what we see. We model ourselves on the world that's around. It's just how human nature is. We know that anatomically you can do anything, and you're capable of doing anything. But socially speaking, we model ourselves based on what is proximate. If you're a woman, you're much more likely to aspire to to greater things if you see other women aspiring and achieving those greater things. And the same goes for ethnicity. Like, you'll see, like, if you go back, there was in some communities you had the first lawyer, and then immediately after that, just a few short years after, there were many different people after. So that helps expand them. And I think creators do have a role also in terms of the type of stories we tell, not to just regurgitate the same stories. And there is a risk, I feel that risk when I'm writing stories myself, that yes, I might wish to tell different stories, but there's always that risk at the back of my mind that, just based on what I've consumed in the past, I don't want to end up accidentally regurgitating what
Mhm.
I've already,
Yeah. So what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that I'm hearing, as an African creative,
Mhm,
there's always that obligation
mhm,
to um, there's a certain obligation that you have to fulfill. I owe this to the to the people who are here currently,
mhm,
and also for future generations. So there's
mhm,
there's that element.
mhm,
So 10 years ago, I think I'd just started a family. You
mhm.
hadn't.
Uh-huh.
10 years later, I have 3 kids. You have a child,
I have a
and
son,
and and
yes.
so what I want us to talk about, because the African Samurai,
Mhm,
both the comic series and now having Yasuke,
mhm,
and sort of being like that series now shows that there's an actual person who existed. And
mhm,
what I want to bring into this discussion is, now that we have children,
mhm.
what is the importance of children seeing heroes that look like them?
It's extremely important. It's extremely important, and we cannot produce fast enough. When I was trying to find content for my own son to see, as kids need music, songs, whatever, I was fascinated that it's all French Congolese content from Cameroon. And it really begged the question that we don't think of DRC in Kenya. We don't think of DRC as being more advanced than Kenya, but in terms of producing children's content, they're way ahead of us, way ahead. And also my
And
travels,
here, sorry to interrupt,
yeah,
here we're talking about
creating songs, children's rhymes. They have hours and hours and hours and hours of content.
wow.
Some of the animation might not be like peak, but the music
Mhm.
is excellent. It's second
And
to none.
that's quite
It's so good
interesting.
that the parents can also listen along. It's not Nickelodeon type.
It-
Sorry for that, Nickelodeon. But I mean, I'm just being honest. I'm just keeping it real, that the music is really at the highest standard possible. I've not encountered any other children's content that musically is at that level. It is superior. The kids love it. They
Mhm.
demand it. Like, even when I would try to show him something else, maybe because we were in a context where we didn't have access to YouTube or whatever, and it was just Nickelodeon, he would not touch Nickelodeon. He would shove it
Mhm.
aside. I'm not interested in this. He wanted the song, the dance, the beats, and all of that. And also in my own travels, as during my career, I think it was about 2015, I traveled to Madagascar, which, uh, let me just give some context.
Mhm.
The reason why I thought we never invested in animation was, I assumed that, oh, Kenya is a poor country, therefore we cannot afford any, we don't have any
We're
surplus.
not
We
poor.
don't have any surplus
We're
for,
just
for animation.
mismanaged.
But what
And
my travels to these quote unquote poor places like
mm,
Madagascar, DRC, and the rest showed me was that it is a choice. We have no trouble affording these skyscrapers you see about here. We have no trouble affording, you know, standard gauge railways to nowhere. Yet, when it comes to cultural creation, what the content that the next generation is going to consume, suddenly we start fidgeting. And I could not understand that until I went to places like Madagascar, and I saw the seriousness with which they treat culture, the seriousness with which they treat their content. They take it extremely seriously, and it completely reconfigured. Once I came back, I could not unsee what I had seen. I could not unknow what I knew, and I knew that we have a problem. We have a very serious problem that you know um, it's like we are hollow of content. you have buildings. And also it also stems to how we think about innovation. Anytime we think about innovation, whether it's in the tech sector, let's not even just talk about culture now. The first instinct of the powers that be is brick and mortar. How many buildings can we put up? How many Ethernet cables and whatever can we put? That's all well and good. Go off to Konza and put up all these things, but there's very little thought about the humans that are going to populate these structures. And humans are culture. Culture is the software that's going to run these humans, and that's where we come in as storytellers. People have to see themselves in science fiction. There was, even what you're holding in your hand, this existed in Star Trek before it existed as an actual thing. So
Mm.
we extrapolate the possibilities, and we deal with the science. We put out these possibilities that now the science catches up with.
Mhm. Yeah. And I mean, just from my own experience and what you've talked about with, looking for content that your son can consume and not finding and having that. And for us creatives, the beauty is that when you're looking for whatever it is that you're seeking and you don't find,
Mhm.
the instinct is why not create it? And that
Yeah.
is the same thing
Mhm.
that happened for me.
Mhm.
So I have 3 kids,
Mhm.
and they're all below the age of 10. And so for me, it is being able to find content, either in the form of video or
Mhm.
even books,
Mhm.
and not finding. And
Mhm.
there's a startup that there's something that I ran quite a while back. It
Mhm.
ran into uh, quite a number of challenges, and I had to put it on hold. But I had started what was then called Safari Tales, which was
Mhm.
basically African folk tales, digitizing African folk tales.
Mhm.
And so what now I have been looking at is,
Mhm.
okay, maybe there's another way of going about this.
Mhm.
And I'm venturing into writing poetry for children.
Nice.
So and it's because looking at the space and looking at what are some of the stories that are being told, what are the storybooks that children are
Mhm.
reading, what are the animations that children
Mhm.
are watching, who
Mm.
are these hero characters
Mhm.
that children are aspiring to. So every time my son says he wants to be like Spider-Man, I
Mhm.
cringe because I'm like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wish there was a way that the story of Luanda Magere
Mhm.
can be modeled
Mhm.
into Spider-Man, because he had, the belief in powers, in
Mhm.
having special powers and
Mhm.
superpowers.
Yeah.
Because Luanda Magere had a superpower.
Mhm.
It was in his shadow. If
Mhm.
there's a way that can, and I know that there are animators.
Mhm.
I know what's his name? Kwame Nyongo has
Yes.
done.
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
Kwame Nyong'o, Maurice Odede. Luanda Magere is one of the most visited folk
mhm.
tales. So many animators have had their attempt at it, and there will be many
And there
others.
will be
Yeah.
many. And what I love about the story of and not just the story of Yasuke, but what are some of the things that people have opened their minds to
Mhm.
in having seen the animation series is like, oh, it is actually possible to have black
Mhm.
characters in animation
Mhm.
as the
Mm.
superheroes, and that sort of shows the way
Mhm.
for other animators to do
Mhm.
that. um so let's come back to your work. I know
Mhm.
that there's a project that you did on Dead and Kimathi.
Yes.
Yes, talk to us about
Way
it.
back when.
Yes, I
You're
know.
confessing your age.
If it is
Yeah.
not evident yet.
Yeah. Very much like Yasuke. There are gaps in Dedan Kimathi's recorded history that are difficult to piece together, unless you have like a research grant and you're actually going to go and interview like all family members and these things. At the time I did that, I had just left law school. I just left the Kenya School of Law to draw comics. Crazy idea. And what I was seeing was that we were isolated in academia. We had access to all this information about land tenure systems in Kenya and how they've been misused, and where how basically how we got here today. And I felt like we need to break out of academia and get this information out into the public domain. And for me at that time, comics seemed like the most viable route for me because I could draw. I had a facility with language, And those are the two things that were available, and we had the internet, which we also benefited
Oh,
from.
yes.
So what I looked at was I drew out what we knew about Kimathi's life onto a timeline, and I looked at where the gaps are and where creative license could be used. I knew he had served in Burma. I knew that he'd come back at the close of the war, and I knew he had worked in the Kenya Forestry Department at some point in Nyeri. In about 47, he joins the Kiama Kiafote, Kenya Africa. What is it called? Yeah, the cow.
Yes.
So,
It's
and
Pan
then I
African
knew at
Union.
some point, obviously, he would have had to have come into contact with cow officials like Kenyatta and
Like Kenyatta.
etc.
Yes.
So I looked at the timeline. I looked at where the gaps. So, how would he have? Who would he have come into contact with when he was in Nairobi? How would he have been radicalized? Where did the politics begin? And I tried to explore those things using characters, some fictional characters. I gave him a friend called Chege, who he meets in Nairobi, and they try and find their way, and they get into trouble and they have to run off to Nyeri, because I needed to also locate him in Nyeri.
Yes,
For
as the
further on.
emergency period is starting.
So as I was making these ideas up in my head and drawing the comic, it was a very rudimentary comic. I mean, when I look back at it, I'm almost embarrassed. But funnily enough, it was so popular. It was in my estimation, it was almost disproportionately popular to the quality of work. Being my first comic, it was quite popular to the extent that it even came into the radar of Questlove of the Roots, and a lot of people saw it. You still remember it?
Yes, I do.
And I owe a lot to that first comic of trying to make sense of Dedan Kimathi's life, piece together. I did about 4 issues in the space of 1 month before I completely burnt out. Completely underestimating how much work went into drawing comics, because I was writing and drawing simultaneously. I had a friend helping me in a hobby.
Yeah.
So I try to touch on religion. I try to touch on like what colonialism felt like in the city of Nairobi, and I try to touch on all these various aspects. A love interest, Mukami. Yeah, it was good fun. It was good fun. I even at some point got arrested on the campus grounds for staying overtime, and then everything for you as a student is useful. I took that and I was like, so this is what it's like to be in the custody of the state. So yeah, very interesting. Yeah,
Okay. Okay. And as we come to towards the end
present
of
day. Oh.
yeah. No, sorry. Let's talk about what you're currently working on.
So currently, okay, there's been a lot of it. It would take much more time than we have to go through all the various comics I've drawn. I drew comics for the Star for about 4 years. I had a 6-panel comic there, and doing animation at the same time. In terms of books proper published ones, in 2017 I started working on Art of Unlearning, which I had a chance to show you, and which was basically just graphic novel. I was putting together a lot of philosophical ideas that had gathered over time working, and now I'm currently working on something called Trust, which is in a near future, a near alternate future, based a lot on Kenya, but I don't explicitly call it Kenya, and it explores the intersection between our, the future technologies, specifically, decentralizing technologies like blockchain. What will it be like when we don't need a state? What will it be like when our technology has removed the need for these intermediaries in our representative democracy? It's just direct democracy. And what challenges would they face? Would the currently powerful entities, whether it's in energy and whatever, would they just sit and watch it happen? So Trust explores that conflict, and it also borrows a lot from the pre-existing decentralized cultures. Like if you look at the Maasai, I look at them as being super decentralized. So that's what I'm currently exploring in Trust, and I hope to publish it toward the end of this year.
Okay, that's interesting because one of the things that I sort of decided to do with this new season is to look at that intersection between technology, arts, culture, heritage, and things like that. And so, whatever you're working on, the project that you're working on is, smack in the middle of that. So, I'd like us to, as we come towards the end of this show, when you sort of cast your eyes like towards the future and looking at the space that you're in, What do you see as some of the? I know there's been a lot of fascination in futuristic,
Mm-hmm.
um, kind of reimagining
Mm-hmm.
how Africa in the future would look like.
Mm-hmm.
How do you imagine that as a person and as even as an
Mm.
animator?
You know the Sankofa bud that you go back in order to go forward.
No.
The Sankofa bud, you'll see it in I don't know. It comes out of a community in Ghana.
Okay.
They have this drawing, this iconography of a bird that is bent backwards toward its tail.
Oh yes, I've seen
Yes.
it.
And I feel very much that that's where we are. There's a reason why these people keep talking about this
Mm.
and keep wanting to go back. It's in the zeitgeist. It's in the collective consciousness in Africa right now. We do have this strong sense that we need to reinterrogate the past because what we have in our books is not ours. And only by doing that will we be able to make sense of what the future looks like, because it's still us who are going to build it. It's still us who are going to have to build this. The future is not out there. It's us building from here on, and a precondition for being able to build here onwards is reevaluating ourselves, what we are capable of. It almost seems disappointing that we need Yasukes to remind us of what we are capable of. It should be obvious, but you can't make that assumption, especially for the young. You need to do the work of telling them that yes, you are capable, because unfortunately, the rest of the world will be making an effort to say the opposite. So it's also a reaction to that, but beyond that, it's also about just doing what needs to be done. Show this future. For me, an ideal future would be one in which um, we don't need powerful middlemen standing in between us in order to be able to do what we need to do. Not to be too long-winded, but even this form of representative democracy we have right now, that picking one person among us to go and represent us, is very imperfect. What we have now came when the fastest thing that could move was a horse, and that's what our political system is based on. So, like in Kisii, where I'm from, we'd pick one person that you go, and they would spend like 3-4 days getting to Nairobi from Kendu Bay to Kisumu, taking a train 3 days. So it's imperfect, As a woman, I would wonder, why is somebody legislating on my reproductive health and they're a bloke? What do they know about my? So more direct forms would allow us to have much more agency in our life. And I think I'm not fascinated just about the sexy aspects of technology. For me, it's that, like, how much can we remove the burden of layers of unnecessary intermediaries from our lives. That's what technology will really be powerful in doing. And I think it's within our reach, but we'll have to fight for it.
Great, and that's a great point for us to finish. I wouldn't want to add any more. So thank you so much,
Thank you.
Chief Nyamweya. It's great reconnecting with you after so many years, and
Too long.
I love. Yes, I think it's been too long, but as you
Yeah.
can see, I've been busy.
Too long. Too long.
But I'm really happy about us having this conversation, and it's come at a very good time when there's so much happening in the space, and there's so much happening around us, and for the creatives, it's a great time to be a creative, I think. Yeah.
Definitely.
So thank you so much for coming.
And thank you for having me.
Great. So it's been wonderful. I hope you've enjoyed the conversations. I have been your host, Njeri Wangare, and thank you. I'd love to hear your comments. Please write to me. Find me on any social platform at Kenyan Poet, whichever social platform it is, or write to me, Njeri Wangare at kenyanpoet.com. So until next time, bye-bye.